I had just moved into a brand new house in a neighborhood I didn't really know. Sure, I had done some research before moving in and even visited the area a few times, but that didn't mean I truly understood what it was like to live there. From what I'd seen during those visits, the place seemed incredibly quiet. Hardly anyone was ever outside, and the few people I did notice mostly kept to themselves. Even on the day I moved in, when the moving truck was parked outside, and I was constantly going back and forth carrying boxes, not a single neighbor came over to say hello or welcome me. Honestly, I didn't mind that too much. I'd always been the quiet neighbor wherever I lived. Still, it was noticeable how everyone here seemed the same way. It made it hard to get a sense of who exactly lived around me. The strange thing started on my second day in the house. I hadn't started my new job yet, so I spent the day inside trying to get everything organized. Boxes were everywhere, and it was stressing me out, so I wanted to unpack as quickly as possible. On top of that, it had been snowing outside most of the day, which made staying indoors even easier. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted. I ended up going to bed early, around 8 p.m. At some point during the night, I suddenly woke up. The first thing I realized was that it definitely wasn't morning. I rolled over and looked at the clock. 2 a.m. Just as I started wondering why I had woken up, I heard it. A strange scraping sound. It was faint and muffled, followed by a soft, hollow thump. A few seconds later, the scraping happened again. Then another thump. Over and over. Curious and slightly confused, I got out of bed. I still had no idea what I was hearing, so I walked over to the window and looked down toward my front yard. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing in my driveway, shoveling snow. He moved slowly back and forth, scraping a line of snow and tossing it to the side of the driveway. The strange scraping sound I heard earlier suddenly made sense. The man was bundled up in dark winter clothing from head to toe, making it nearly impossible to see any details about him. I stood there watching from the window for probably 2 or 3 minutes. And honestly, it started to creep me out. I mean, sure, I had just moved in, and maybe this guy was trying to do something nice for the new neighbor. But doing it at 2 in the morning, without ever even meeting me first, felt strange. After a few minutes, I decided to go downstairs. I figured I'd introduce myself and at least ask what he was doing. So I put on my shoes, grabbed a jacket, and opened the front door. But the moment I stepped outside, he was gone, just like that. He had disappeared. And the weirdest part was, it wasn't like he had finished the job. Half of the driveway was still completely covered in snow. It looked like he had just stopped right in the middle of shoveling and left. I stood there for a moment, scanning the street. Every house around me was dark. The entire neighborhood looked silent and asleep. None of the other driveways had even been shoveled. After a minute or so, I went back inside, climbed into bed, and eventually fell asleep again. The next day, I spent most of my time unpacking more boxes. Part of me expected that guy to show up at my door at some point, maybe to introduce himself or explain what he had been doing. But he never did. It snowed again that day, on and off, covering the whole neighborhood with a fresh layer of snow. Eventually, I figured I probably wasn't going to get any answers about the strange guy from the night before. That evening, I stayed up later since I finally had my TV set up. But I was still tired from the long day, so I went to bed around 11 p.m. And then it happened again. I woke up a little after 2 a.m. And just like before, that same muffled scraping sound echoed through the quiet house. This time, I jumped out of bed and rushed to the window. Sure enough, the same man was out there again, slowly shoveling my driveway. I didn't waste any time. I hurried downstairs, threw on some clothes, and ran out the front door. But somehow, it was like he knew, because once again, the second I stepped outside, He was gone. No sign of him anywhere. The longer I stood out there in the freezing cold, the more this uneasy feeling crept over me. I waited outside for about 15 minutes, just in case he came back. But eventually, I gave up and went back to bed. And then it kept happening. For several nights in a row, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to that same scraping sound. I'd look out the window and see him out there, slowly and almost eerily shoveling my driveway. Eventually, I stopped trying to go outside. Instead, I'd just roll over and try to fall back asleep. But the whole thing left me confused. I had no idea what to make of it. Maybe he had some strange connection to the house, or the people who lived here before me. Or maybe he didn't even know I had moved in at all. Even though the whole situation gave me a terrible feeling and genuinely creeped me out. It's not like I could just call the police about it. What would I even say? Hey, there's a guy who shows up every night and shovels my driveway for free. It would sound ridiculous. But I swear, something about the way this man moved, and the way he always disappeared the moment I tried to confront him, it just didn't feel right. The whole thing was unsettling in a way I couldn't explain. By the sixth night, it happened again. I woke up in the middle of the night to the same scraping sound of a shovel outside. Even though I already knew exactly what I was going to see, I still got out of bed and started walking toward the window. But right before I reached it, the sound suddenly stopped. Just silence. I quickly stepped up to the window and looked outside. He was gone. There was no way he could have disappeared that quickly. There had barely been a second between the moment the shoveling stopped and the moment I looked out. I was certain he had still been out there. The strange part was that the driveway was now completely cleared of snow. I stood there staring outside for a couple minutes, waiting to hear anything, but the night stayed completely quiet. It almost felt like he knew I had walked up to the window. At that point, I was tired, annoyed, and completely fed up with the whole situation. So I rushed downstairs, threw on my coat and boots, and swung open the front door to finally see where he went. The moment the door opened, I nearly stumbled backward. The man was standing on my porch, just a foot away from the door. He was tall, holding the shovel loosely at his side. Up close, I could finally see his face clearly. He had a thick, messy beard and long black hair that hung down to his shoulders, damp from the snow. His eyes were locked onto mine with an intense stare. The man looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. His skin looked pale and sickly. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. The shock of seeing him standing there so suddenly completely froze me. And what made the moment even more terrifying was that he wasn't saying anything either. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there on my porch, staring directly at me from barely a foot away. Eventually, I forced myself to speak. I asked him what he was doing there. When I said that, his eyes seemed to tighten even more, like they suddenly grew heavier. He kept staring at me for another moment. Then, without saying a single word, he turned around and stepped off the porch. I stayed standing in the doorway, watching him walk away. He moved down the driveway, reached the road, and then continued walking down the street until he disappeared into the distance. I stood there feeling completely shaken, confused, still in shock. Eventually, I closed the door. For the first time, I seriously thought about calling the police. But the more I thought about it, the more pointless it seemed. The man was already gone. I still had no idea who he was. And technically, he hadn't actually done anything. At the end of the day, I'd basically be calling the police based on a bad feeling and the suspicion that something might happen. I knew they probably wouldn't take that very seriously. So once again, I went upstairs and got back into bed. The next day, it didn't snow at all. With the house finally unpacked and everything set up, I was able to relax for most of the day. but that uneasy feeling still lingered in the back of my mind. Being in a neighborhood I didn't know, with no one around to talk to about what had happened, only made that feeling worse. Eventually, the sun set, and like the nights before, I went to bed. That night, I woke up at exactly 2 a.m. again. But this time, there was no sound. No scraping, no shovel hitting the pavement. Nothing at all. It felt like my body had simply gotten used to waking up at that time, expecting to hear the man outside clearing the driveway. I just lay there in bed for a few minutes, listening to the strange silence filling the house. It felt almost eerie. After a while, I shut my eyes and tried to fall back asleep. That's when I heard something, a very faint thump from somewhere downstairs. It was so quiet that I almost questioned whether I had actually heard it at all. On its own, it didn't sound like anything serious. Honestly, it could have just been the house settling. But considering everything that had been happening, and the fact that it was once again 2 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't just ignore it. I stayed still and listened for another minute. Nothing. No more sounds. But at that point, I knew there was no way I was going to fall asleep without checking. So I got out of bed and started walking downstairs. As I moved through the hallway, my eyes were locked on the front door the entire time. I don't know why, but something in my mind expected to see it open. When I finally reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into the hallway, I walked straight toward the door, still staring at it. Then something in the corner of my vision caught my attention. Slowly, I turned my head toward the living room. My heart immediately dropped. The man was standing there, right in the middle of the room. His back was facing me, and he was holding the shovel at his side. He wasn't moving, not even a little. It was almost completely dark in the living room, so he was basically just standing there in the pitch black, perfectly still. It was like he didn't know I was there, or worse, like he didn't care. The moment I realized what I was looking at, panic hit me. I turned around and ran back upstairs as fast as I could. Once inside my room, I locked the door and immediately called 911. While I waited, the entire house stayed completely silent. About 5 minutes later, a police officer arrived. After searching the house, he found the back door open. But other than that, no one else was inside. The man was gone. I explained everything that had been happening over the past several nights, giving the officer the best description of the man that I could remember. He wrote everything down and filed a report, but that was pretty much the end of it. There wasn't really any investigation afterward. To this day, I'm not sure why. It seemed obvious that someone had broken into my house, and I had given them a fairly clear description of what he looked like. But nothing else ever came from it. I still don't know who that man was, or why he kept coming to my house. I also have no idea what he actually wanted from me. The way he looked, the way he moved, and the fact that he kept appearing outside in the middle of the night over and over again made me feel like things were only going to get worse. Eventually, a couple of my friends back home suggested that maybe he was sleepwalking. They said the way I described his lifeless movements and the strange routine of him showing up every night at the exact same time might point to that. But honestly, that explanation feels like a stretch to me. Even if that were true, it would still be incredibly disturbing and dangerous. If I had tried to stop him, wake him up, or confront him more directly, it could have triggered some kind of violent reaction. And that theory still doesn't explain one thing. How did he always seem to know the moment I left the window and went downstairs? Whatever was really happening, I'll probably never know, because a few months later, I moved away. Last autumn, I finally did something I had dreamed about for years. I moved into a small cabin deep in the woods. For the longest time, it felt like one of those maybe someday dreams. But once I landed a remote job and saw how insane normal house prices had become, Living somewhere small, cheap, and far away from the chaos suddenly made perfect sense. Since the road leading to the cabin was rough and the place itself was tiny, I decided to travel light. I got rid of most of my belongings and kept only what I truly needed. Because of that, the move was surprisingly quick and simple. The cabin's previous owner was a young guy who was selling his parents' old place. He didn't seem attached to it at all and said he just wanted it off his hands. According to him, the cabin had been well maintained over the years, and a few renovations had even been done to make it feel a bit more like a modern home. Still, from the outside, it looked exactly like what you'd imagine a rugged woodland cabin to look like. On the evening I moved in, just as the sun was starting to dip below the trees, someone unexpectedly showed up. A man knocked on the door and introduced himself as Chandler. He said he lived in another cabin somewhere nearby in the same stretch of woods. He looked to be in his early 40s, pretty average looking, but incredibly friendly. Honestly, maybe a little too friendly. Still, it didn't feel fake, just a bit over the top. After we talked outside for about 15 minutes, he asked if he could take a quick look around the inside of the cabin. Since the place was mostly empty and he seemed genuinely curious, I didn't see the harm and let him in. The cabin was small, so it didn't take long for him to see everything. Just a few minutes, really. But between the chatting and the little tour, night had already fallen. Naturally, I figured he'd realize it was getting late and head out on his own. Instead, he casually sat down on the couch and kept the conversation going. I was still standing by the door, slightly surprised that I even had to say anything. Finally, I mentioned that it was getting pretty late and he should probably head home. He smiled, apologized, and stood up, thanking me for the conversation before leaving. What struck me as odd, though, was that he didn't seem to have driven there. I assumed he must have just walked back through the woods in the dark to wherever his cabin was. The last few minutes of that interaction felt a little strange, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was probably overthinking it. Maybe he was just one of those overly friendly people who didn't notice the time. I got the fireplace going and spent some time figuring out how it worked. Then I laid back on the couch, trying to relax after the long day. The silence inside the cabin was almost surreal. No traffic, no distant voices, just the soft crackling of the fire. At some point, I must have drifted off right there on the couch. When I woke up, the fire was still burning, so I figured it couldn't have been more than a couple of hours later. The cabin was completely dark and quiet. I stretched, got up, and walked into the kitchen to grab some water. I was thinking I'd probably take a quick shower and then go to bed. But while I was filling a glass at the sink, I heard something outside. It was faint, like a light shuffling sound coming from somewhere near the front door. I froze and listened. For about a minute, there was nothing. Complete silence again. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I walked over to the door and slowly pulled back the small curtains that covered the little windows built into it. The door didn't have a peephole, just those old-fashioned panes of glass with curtains. The moment I moved the curtain aside, I saw Chandler standing right there on the porch. He looked just as startled as I felt. Almost immediately, he forced out an awkward laugh and said he was just about to knock, speaking in that same overly cheerful tone from earlier. By this point, it had to be close to 9 p.m., and I'll be honest, it seriously creeped me out. Especially because I had heard him outside for at least a minute before I walked to the door, which meant he definitely wasn't just about to knock. For all I knew, he could have been standing out there for much longer. "What are you doing back here?" I asked. "It's pretty late, Chandler." As I said that, I glanced behind him again and noticed the same thing as before, no car. He hadn't driven here. He laughed again and explained that he was having a campfire back in his cabin and wanted to see if I'd like to join him. There was absolutely no chance I was going to do that. but I did ask him where his cabin actually was. I remembered him mentioning earlier that it was somewhere nearby, but I wanted to know exactly how close he lived. He pointed down one of the narrow trails leading away from my place and said it was about a mile down that path. The trail he pointed to was pitch black. Honestly, the entire forest looked like a wall of darkness. I told him no thanks and said I just wanted to relax at my new place for the next few days, preferably alone, but that I appreciated the offer. He kept that same big smile on his face and said it was no problem, that he understood completely. But instead of turning around and leaving, his eyes drifted past me toward the fireplace glowing inside the cabin. "Why don't we just hang out here then?" he said casually. "Looks like you already have a fire going." At that point, the uneasy feeling in my stomach turned into real concern. Something about the way he said it, the way he didn't take the hint, it made my skin crawl. I answered with a firm, sharp no, pulled the curtain shut, and stepped back. Through the fabric, I could still see the faint outline of him standing right outside the door. And he didn't leave. He just stood there for an uncomfortably long time. Finally, after what felt like forever, he stepped off the porch. I went back to the window and carefully peeked out again, watching as he walked away and disappeared into the woods. The darkness swallowed him almost instantly. Only then did I realize how fast my heart was beating. For a moment, that encounter genuinely scared me. The way he kept pushing, trying to convince me to go with him out into the forest in the middle of the night. I had never even been down that trail before. I had no clue where it actually led. From my perspective, he was basically asking me to follow him blindly into pitch-black woods. And that gave me a really bad feeling. I went back into the kitchen with my glass of water and just stood there, trying to process everything that had just happened. Then suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the forest. The sound cut through the silence so sharply that it made me jump. It took me a couple seconds to register what I had just heard. A gunshot. I immediately rushed to the door and pulled it open, staring out into the darkness toward the direction the sound had come from. My stomach dropped. The shot had come from the same direction Chandler had just walked somewhere along that trail. Before my brain could even fully process what that might mean, Chandler burst out of the woods. He came sprinting straight toward my cabin, yelling for help at the top of his lungs. It was so dark that by the time I noticed him, he was already almost at the porch. Within seconds, maybe 10, he reached the doorway. I stood there frozen, completely paralyzed by fear. And before I could react, he ran right past me and straight through the open door into my cabin. No one came running after him from the woods, which made everything even more surreal. No one came running after him from the woods, which made everything even more surreal. I turned back toward Chandler, and that's when I really saw him hunched over in the hallway, clutching the side of his stomach, telling me he'd been shot. But then my eyes caught something that made my heart nearly stop. His shirt was lifted on one side, and tucked there was the silver handle of a gun. Adrenaline surged through me, my mind racing as I processed every single detail in an instant. Without thinking twice, I lunged forward, grabbed my car keys, and bolted out to my car. Chandler called my name a few times, but didn't move to stop me. As soon as I was a safe distance away, I called the police. I drove straight to the station while officers went back to check on the cabin. What they found was even more disturbing. Chandler was still sitting inside, calmly in a chair in the living room, as if he'd been waiting for me the whole time. The officers handcuffed him and tried questioning him, but he barely said a word. When they dug deeper, they discovered he didn't actually own a cabin in the area. He had no address, no verifiable identity at all. And the revolver I had seen under his shirt? It was fully loaded, except for one missing bullet. Knowing he had that gun the entire time, it was terrifying. If I had trusted him and gone back inside, or worse, followed him out into the woods, I seriously don't think I would be telling this story today. I had only been living alone in this house for about 2 weeks. I'd moved here for work and jumped straight into my new job, so I didn't have much time to settle in, but somehow it all felt fine. Nothing fancy about the place, but it was mine. The town I could afford wasn't exactly glamorous, and my paycheck didn't allow for much, but the people I met seemed good enough. Just regular folks trying to get by. One night, after getting home from work, I walked in and was hit with a terrible, almost nauseating smell. I had no idea what it was, but it was rancid, like something had gone horribly wrong. I searched the entire house, room by room, and found absolutely nothing. A few hours later, it disappeared, so I brushed it off. The next day, I came home and same smell. This time, I went over the whole house again, top to bottom, but still found nothing that could explain it, except something else caught my eye. The lock on my back door, the sliding glass one, was flipped up, unlocked. I was sure I had locked it. I checked all the doors every night before bed, and I hadn't even opened that door since moving in. There was no way it should have been unlocked. I stepped outside into the backyard. Not much to see fenced on the sides, open at the back to the woods. I couldn't tell if there were houses back there or just forest. At night, it was just dark trees. I didn't see anything unusual, so I went back in and locked it myself, triple checking that it was secure this time. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. If the door was unlocked, someone else had to have done it, but nothing was missing. And the smell? Weird. Yes, but not proof enough that something was seriously wrong. I sat on the couch and told myself, if anything else happened, I would know for sure and call the police immediately. I know some will criticize me for not calling them right then, but in that moment, I didn't think I was in the middle of a horror story. Maybe I had forgotten to lock it. Maybe I had stepped outside at some point without remembering. I just didn't know. I went to bed a few hours later, but sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It wasn't a sudden jolt more, like something slowly pulled me out of sleep. As I drifted into awareness, I thought I heard a loud scratching, like some kind of buzzing machine. But I was still half asleep, and by the time my eyes opened, the noise was gone. Almost immediately, though, another sound grabbed my attention. A constant rhythmic dripping echoed through the house, like water hitting the metal sink in the kitchen. At first, I assumed I'd left the faucet slightly open. Still groggy, I dragged myself out of bed and crept down the stairs. The house was quiet aside from that steady drip, 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 drip. When I got closer to the kitchen, the rancid smell hit me full force. My half-asleep brain snapped fully awake. I approached the sink and froze. The faucet was indeed dripping, but something else was in the sink. I couldn't tell exactly what it was in the dark, but it was mangled, torn apart, and smelled absolutely horrible. It looked like someone had tried to shove it down the drain and then just stopped. Then my eyes flicked to the back door. Even in the dim light, I could see the latch was flipped up, unlocked. That's when it hit me. Someone had been in my house. Probably the same person who had been messing with the sink. And they had gone to hide when they heard me get up. I nearly forgot about the sink entirely. My full focus went to the intruder. I scanned the house for any sign of movement. Turning on the lights was tempting, but I didn't want to alert whoever was inside. I moved carefully back into the hallway and crept up the stairs, silence pressing in around me. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the upper hall, a sudden, heavy set of footsteps thumped across the floor below, right near the kitchen. I froze, panic surging, my body locking up from the shock, even though I already knew someone was in the house. The footsteps stopped in the kitchen. I could hear a struggle, whatever it was. They were forcing it into the sink. Moments later, the garbage disposal kicked on, grinding, then fell silent again. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, listening. Through the quiet, I could hear deep, labored breathing from the kitchen. Then footsteps shuffled back to another room. I caught the sound of a bag being moved, rustled, sorted. Finally, the intruder returned to the kitchen, slid the back door open, and then silence. I finally made it back to my bedroom and called the police. By then, whoever had been in my house had vanished, probably run off into the woods behind my backyard. What the officers discovered inside, though, was beyond disturbing. In the sink, they found evidence that the man had been trying to shove animal carcasses down the drain. Not just small animals, something big, like a deer, had been cut into pieces so it could fit into the pipes. That explained the rancid smell I'd been noticing over the past few days. He had been breaking in repeatedly, using my home as a place to get rid of whatever it was. But why? Why choose my house? The cops speculated he might have thought the place was empty, but that didn't make sense to me. I'd lived there for 2 weeks and had furniture, belongings. There was no way he could have thought it was abandoned. No one knows exactly why he did it. Maybe he wanted me to leave by making the house unbearable with that stench. Maybe he hated me for some reason. Or, in a darker possibility, maybe he was trying to cover something up, or even frame me. I have no proof of that, just a gut feeling. Even years later, living somewhere completely different, I still wake up sometimes, heart racing, convinced I can smell that same horrific rancid odor. That night left a scar I don't think will ever fully fade.